next speaker is going to give you guys a sneak peek into his book, who's being launched next week. It's called Post-Truth Business. It's about branding. And Sean actually thinks that the world is defined by mistrust. So the two key elements when you're working with branding is to create trust and talk about the truth. He will tell you much more about it. Hopefully you can make some learnings, combine them with your new growth hacking tips. Please welcome Sean from Brand Positive.
Hi everyone, and thank you for that, and thank you to the organisers for inviting me over here again. I've been coming to Copenhagen for the last 10 years and always have a fantastic time with people like the Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies, the local absolutely superb trend forecasting consultancy. Okay, so this morning I'm going to talk about my new book, which is mentioned is out next week globally, The Post-Truth Business. And the key point that I make in the book is that brands are built on trust. Businesses are built on trust. Society is built on trust. If we don't have truth and trust underpinning every relationship, be it the relationship between politician and voter, or brand and consumer, or business and employee, or indeed in our own personal relationships, then things go horribly wrong very, very quickly. This issue of the world being defined by mistrust, societies globally being defined by mistrust, is causing problems for businesses on a global scale. To quote The Economist, the basis of all brand values is trust. That's why businesses have an immense incentive to retain it. You can look around the world, you can look to the world's leading business figures. Jack Ma, I'm sure you'll all be more than familiar with Jack Ma's famous statement, or one of his key famous statements, when he said, once you have trust, the rest is easy. So this underpinning, this huge foundation, this fundamental point, is one that I think, and it amazes me, and it's why I wrote the book, so many businesses seem to look at this issue, with the issues of authenticity and credibility. When I always say credibility is built on behavior, how you experience brands, how you experience corporations, how you experience governments in the real world, that is where credibility is based. That's where credibility is built. And yet what do we see from agencies like Havas, who conduct their global studies into trust on an annual basis, and what have they found out? That those core issues that we used to see from consumers on a global basis, looking at markets, be they either the fashion world, or the motor industry, or the hotel world, or airlines, or soft drinks, or spirits, across all sectors, where we used to generally associate consumer brand relationships with loyalty and respect and affection. What we're now seeing are those relationships being turned on their head, and increasingly the consumer brand relationship is all about skepticism and cynicism. And I say this impacts brands on a global basis across a multitude of sectors. And yet while most people, I think at events like this, fantastic though they are, and I know you've got, I think, over 6,000 delegates here this year, which is absolutely astonishing, showing the power of TechBBQ. Instead, I think you'll see things like this. And so, rightly so, when you're talking with your trend forecasters or scenario planners, or your trend spotters, your trend analysts, call them what you will, we all know that you can go to endless, fascinating discussions about the two key things of our time, so many people say, AI and blockchain. With half the world, probably more, worrying, will AI lead to the complete lack of my job, for instance? without people saying blockchain, is blockchain coming to save us from the point of view of blockchain giving every physical product a digital passport? But at the same time, alongside all of these key, incredibly dynamic tech advancements, the core issues of trust and truth, I think, are the ones that really, really underpin brand behavior, underpin brand values, and brand consumer relationships. And it just is amazing how few people really, really think about it on a consistently deep basis. So when I started the book, and I remember it very well, I remember the exact date I started the book, it was April the 3rd last year, when this was the cover of Time magazine, which reflected one they'd done back in the 60s. You know, you all know this as well as I do. I know we have delegates here from absolutely around the world. These issues, when we're seeing increasingly that called into question, particularly by politicians, are issues such as the death of the expert, where truth, we're told, is increasingly subjective, where increasingly there are issues of what's your truth versus my truth. These are really, really fundamental points that I think it's amazing how few brands have taken them on board. And so when we see images like this, we know all about the situation whereby more and more people are viewing the mainstream media as being uniquely biased against them. So whether you are a voter, perhaps in this photograph, in the photograph there, when you've got people walking down the street on their daily commute or whatever, when you could perhaps consider that a couple of those, this is in the US, a couple will be Republicans, a couple Democrats, perhaps one or two will be the extreme left or right of that point of view, all of them will have in common that they view the mainstream media, as I say, as being uniquely biased against them. And this is a real, real problem for us when people are desperately searching for honesty, something they can rely on. And what I find fascinating now is if you look at, again, recent reports from people like Edelman with their annual Global Trust Barometer, what they're picking up on is that, and I'm sure this reflects your points of view as well, increasingly we're seeing people having a couple of journalists that you will hold in particularly high regard. So you will probably be in a situation whereby you believe absolutely what a couple of your core favourite journalists say to you, that you will hold most of the mainstream media with certainly perhaps a strong view of scepticism. You know, this year at the WF meeting in Davos, the World Economic Foundation noted that in terms of fake news and disinformation and misinformation, it's never been easier to distort the truth. Core problem here, of course, is that the very people and the very brands that only a few years ago we looked as being absolutely the shiny, new, futuristically biased brands, the ones that absolutely are going to show us a brave new world, the tech titans of Silicon Valley, are instead the ones who are increasingly being viewed as the ones who are undermining democracy, let alone undermining consumer brand relationships or indeed societal foundations. And this issue, particularly as we've seen this year, and you'll all know this, no doubt, equally well or better than I do, when we've seen issues like, only 6 months ago, the news that shocked the world about Cambridge Analytica having 7,000 data points on 240 million Americans, the entire US electorate, when we saw the implications of, the impact of that industry or that world, that sector, utilizing tricks they'd learnt from Adland, created for them, probably by people just like yourselves in tech world, who had basically come up with a system whereby they could hyper-target people on an absolutely individual basis, meaning that, yes, they were using advertising techniques which may be superb when you're being targeted on a individual basis about perhaps your next holiday based on your past behavior. No one perhaps can argue with that. Or your future fashion purchases based on past behavior. No one could argue with that. But when it's sending you increasingly diversive and extreme political messaging aiming to nudge you to an ever more extreme point of view, what we're seeing is that hyper-targeting and the lack of general awareness of mainstream political messages that we can all discuss and debate, the implications of that hyper-targeting are absolutely undermining democracy. Democracy was designed, obviously, having been around for so long, for a different age, for an analog age. And the world of digitization, as the World Economic Forum put it in Davos, is undermining democracy. And we keep being told that AI is going to get us out of this. And so what that certainly says to myself is that it's people like you know, the next innovators who are coming up with the latest and next great, the next big thing, the amazing new tech platform or tech service that's going to deal with this issue of the way that fake news and hyper-targeting and disinformation is undermining democracy could not be more of an important issue. And so it's going to be down, I think, to people absolutely like yourselves to deal with this, because the world absolutely needs it. And of course, we're also seeing things like this, the idea of, and this is, it's easiest to talk about this from an American point of view, because we all know about, once Trump got into the White House, the amazing statements and the claims about alternative truths and alternative facts and truth being subjective, and all about those issues around, you know, the inauguration parade being wildly overclaimed by him and his supporters. When we're in a world whereby the truth and trust is subjective, we've got a serious problem. And this, again, I think, is one of the issues why this matters to brands across a completely, you know, the complete polarity of spectrums, is that the real difference between brands essentially isn't there. This issue about brand differentiation, the sort of thing that I used to lecture on when I was lecturing on the MBA course at in London universities, as I still do. We should talk all about, you know, genuine differentiation and brand values and all the rest of it. And what are we seeing now? The difference between brand A and brand A is actually difference between brand A and brand A again, with a very small b next to it. Most differentiation is based purely on brand claims. You know, every ad agency in the world will tell you that feelings beat facts, and yet what I'm seeing increasingly is that people want facts. And so again, increasingly, we're seeing the real difference between brands, and in terms of brand choice, when brand switching has never been easier, because most brands are so, and most products are so incredibly similar. The real difference is, essentially, as I see it, the difference between good brand and bad brand. You know, that isn't some sort of utopian viewpoint. Again, this year at the World Economic Forum in Davos, the head of McKinsey, you know, one of the most hard-headed organizations there is, said social innovation is the next big thing. Brands have, corporations have, businesses have to have a social point of view. So along with your reputation capital, you know, when people are viewing brands and corporations from the point of view of, are they honest, trustworthy, are they competent and reliable, I think it's increasingly social capital as well that brands will have to talk about. So alongside all of their financial reporting, and lots of talks here today about fintech, we're increasingly seeing businesses talking about their social impact. What are they doing for the society around them? What is their impact on culture? What are they giving back? Not a utopian liberal with a small L point of view, but a hard-headed business issue. And as I say, if McKinsey are saying it at the World Economic Forum in Davos, I think we can agree it's gone a long, long way forward from where it was only a few years ago. Meanwhile, in brand world, or if you say in comms world, I see really, just as we're seeing these issues about how tech is impacting on brand creation and comms dissemination, we're seeing really Adland splitting into two completely different routes. One is the issue where brands are aiming to achieve fame and talkability via mimetic power, you know, giving audiences, giving consumers the ability to, and hopefully the reason to talk about what brands are up to, with the most obvious example being, over the last couple of years, the campaign that won every major award it's possible to win, Fearless Girl. And now it's all about weaponizing consumers, enabling them to talk about something that was important and resonated and had cultural and social meaning. The other side, obviously, is again back to hyper-targeting, when essentially the difference is the choice between fame or collateral via digital targeting. So to me, briefly in terms of what are the issues that brands need to think about in the book, I talk about, and I come up with a post-truth brand manifesto, because all publishers, as I'm sure all of you authors out there will be aware, all publishers love a manifesto, because journalists can write about it. I talk about, so the key thing, be authentic, be and act how you say it. So, say it and be it. You're judged by your behavior, not just by what you're saying. Brands need to be authentic, they need to resonate, they need to absolutely stand by their core reasons for being, they need to invite consumers in to discuss and to look at and to dig around what they're about. If a brand is hiding something, then essentially, obviously, or a brand isn't prepared to talk about something, the alarm bells go off. And in this issue, obviously, blockchain, we're presuming, with its ability to give every physical product a digital passport, could be here to save us. The brand people talk about constantly, or certainly the brand people talked about first, when I interviewed people globally for the book, was Patagonia, that fantastic brand that encourages you to consume less, and as a catch-22 result actually becomes more and more successful. The issue about transparency, and this goes from everything from buying patterns with brands like Beauty Pie to bands like Radiohead, who famously did the pay what you want thing with their album In Rainbows. There's this issue about, again, The Economist will say, in order for democracy to thrive, there needs to be transparency between politician and voter. I'd say the same thing for business. In order for business to thrive, there needs to be transparency between brand and consumer. Privacy, I think, is the thing that is, to me, almost the number one issue of the day. Increasingly, we're seeing, again, the tech titans of Silicon Valley being blamed for essentially being involved in surveillance capitalism. Wired magazine talk about, will 2018 be seen as the year when privacy was enshrined as an absolute global human right? And if it is, and I sincerely hope it is, desperately hope it is, then those who are involved in undermining privacy are going to find themselves open up to human rights abuses. It's that important. So if you're working for a corporation or a data company or a digital company that is all about undermining privacy, as I say, you're going to find yourself being opened up to being taken to court, put in jail for human rights abuses. It's that important. When we're seeing particularly things like the home being viewed as the latest brand battleground. When we're seeing ourselves followed around the home by the latest Amazon droid, filming us, recording us, is that for our benefit? May well be, perhaps if you are an elderly person who is retaining their independence by being observed to make sure that they are safe, because obviously there's a positive side to this as well. But Orwell will be horrified when he saw, or if he'd foreseen, how people would be inviting surveillance into their homes. I think it's a massive, massive issue. Elsewhere, this issue here about demonstrating empathy. So the point about, again, the privacy here, and one could talk about Android. Obviously, one could talk about Amazon. You can talk about, how we're having increasing amount of things embedded in our home hardware. And I say the issue there absolutely is: are we clear about what we're doing? The core area, or core area of interest I see in privacy, is the one that's all about people now seeing their data as being something that has a financial value. Once we start clearly communicating to people that the data is theirs as much as their clothes are, or their car is, or their home is, and it has a financial value, and as we're seeing now, as we know, there are endless people here, endless startups talking about encouraging consumers to understand that the data has value and that value is theirs. That, I think, is going to become an absolutely astonishing growth market. And the final couple of points I mentioned are things like empathy. I said earlier on about McKinsey talking about social innovation, brands having a social, cultural reason to be, giving something back. Talked about it this year at the World Economic Forum, and brands showing that they care about their consumer, that they care about society is absolutely vital. We've been talking about it for years. Amazing how few brands actually do something about it. And a classic example of a brand that's becoming apolitical, or is demonstrating an apolitical point of view, so non-party political, but just actually resonating with society, as I believe more and more brands have got to do when relevant for the brand and the consumer, was naturally seen about 10 days ago by Nike with a Kaepernick ad. So absolutely a brand taking the point of view that yes, by taking this sort of action, they'll be alienating a great number of consumers, they'll be driving controversy and being comfortable with that because they're doing the right thing, and they're also doing the right thing by their consumers, they're doing the right thing morally, they're doing the right thing socially, and, fair enough, they're doing the right thing for the brand and their consumer target, is, I believe, absolutely an increasing thing that we're going to be seeing. More and more brands becoming activist in nature, standing up for things that say that are relevant for the consumer and relevant for the brand. All wrapped up really in this issue about being trustworthy. Why is it that people should consume? Why should they choose? Why should they have loyalty? In an era when they say there's, apart from anything else, an immense amount of mistrust globally, when there's an incredible amount of disinformation and dismay globally, when there are people playing with democracy, consumers, people, individuals are really, really worried, and they need trust. They need a solid foundation, and if politicians can't give it to them, if the world around isn't given to them, I think brands have an increasingly strong role to play here, which is why obviously we're seeing more and more stuff like this. More and more brands being caught out, more and more corporations being caught out, more and more politicians being caught out by an ever-seeing, never-sleeping media, and rightly so. And I say, in an era when it's never been easier to brand switch, this is really, really key. And so the final slide, again, back to this, as mentioned, the book's out next week. It goes out, I think, in about 10 languages globally, but the core points I'm making is that you have to consider this issue, this really, really serious, deeply serious point. That brands and brand relationships are all about being based on trust, and in a world of mistrust, brands have to really make a huge effort to regain their authenticity. And at the end of the day, what it's all about is that good business really is good business. Thank you. So I don't know if we have any questions on that, or if our time is up.
Hello. Did any of you have a chance to use Slido and put up a question or two?
Yes, Slido up.
Slido.com, maybe? Do we have any questions? You can just raise your arm. Yes?
Mm-hmm,
so the question was, would you say that this applies just as much as B2B as B2C?
Okay, the B2B thing, I gave a speech about exactly that issue about 10 days ago in The Hague, where, oddly enough, I was speaking on the same stage that Barack Obama had spoken on a couple of years previously, which was a wonderful thing. To me, the fascinating thing about B2B, particularly, and also when it's an internal corporate issue, is this issue of, again, of trust. So just as we have to seek trust between, as I mentioned, voter and politician, brand and consumer, it's exactly the same issue when you're talking about the relationship between company and client. If you, or agency and client, this is trust goes across every relationship there is, be it personal in our own relationships or be it us to the government. So this issue of, we all know this, the best company-client relationships are always based on mutual respect, mutual loyalty, mutual trust. If you don't trust your client to tell you what is the real issue, and don't tell you really what is going on. And on the other side, if the agency, for instance, or the creator isn't clearly talking with the client, isn't owning up to their mistakes, which we all make, then that relationship breaks down quickly. You will all know this. If you're on the business owner side and you're dealing with agencies, often we hear time and time again, the strongest client-agency relationships are based on mutual respect, mutual loyalty, and mutual trust. So yes, absolutely.
Questions are starting to pop up, but unfortunately we only have time for one.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Let's go with something very practical.
Should we go the first one?
How should small firms start to build a brand?
Okay, so to answer it very quickly, building a brand from the ground up, from the point of view of relevance to this conversation, again, built on transparency, built on trust. So in terms of achieving trust, we're seeing really it comes down to brands that have either been around long enough to have demonstrated that they are trustworthy. I know IBM, you rely on IBM products because you know they work, or you do it on the basis of perhaps the hand of the maker. In the craft world, in the craft beer market or in the fashion market, that when things are handmade for you, there is a issue there about credibility and trust. Elsewhere, in the pricing area, let's say brands like Beauty Pie, in the beauty world, that will say, you know what? The same few factories make the products for all the big beauty brands, and all those big beauty brands do is take those products, repackage them, and put the price up by about 800%. So Beauty Pie will say, here's some transparent pricing, we'll show you exactly what we pay for exactly the same product, put it into cheap packaging, and you can buy it for 80% less. Which one do you want? Same product, do you want it in a nice bit of packaging or a bit of basic packaging? And you join it on a subscription basis. So I think the increasing number of startups that are coming out with transparent pricing models are hugely undermining legacy brands by basing the whole thing on honesty. Okay,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.